Structuring your stories. Life starts out as normal, something happens, we have to reckon with that, and then the synthesis of that, which means life after the change has happened. Structuring your story is, again, one of those things where we don't have cameras turned on yet, but man, is it important, and it makes all the difference in the world. You know, there's some really great books that talk about story structure as it relates to cinema, and it translates down to the smaller 3 to 5 minute testimony video. And I would suggest reading Save the Cat. That's kind of really very novice, easy way in because it talks about movies, but it helps you see the structure of a film so easily. And you'll see how it relates to your testimony videos, because what I like to do, like, let's say we're telling a salvation story. I want to go, what was life like before coming to know Christ? You know, I was a stockbroker, or I was a 6-year-old kid, or I was a stay-at-home mom, or I was a biker on meth. And then what happened? Like, where did where did it hit the fan? You know, where did life hit the fan? That's the catalyst. That's the thing that happens that gets the person, the tragedy, their life gets turned upside down by something. Something comes along and they have to deal with that in a real human life or death kind of way. Like, I have to figure something out. Something has happened in my life that has caused me to question my worldview or woken me up to even think about asking that question. Typically it's a tragedy. Sometimes it's just a friend invited me to a thing, but that's a part of the structure. Life before, what was life? You're just tripping along and then something happened. What is that something? And then where did you go to find the answers, or how did you find the answer in Christ? And I'd say the act one is the something, life is going along, something happens, oh no, I have to deal with that. Part two is the dealing with that. I was at my lowest point. I didn't know where to turn for answers. I had somebody invited me to church and I thought, this is lame. Or, you know, I'm thinking about a video that we did with Cody where he says, my wife kept nagging me to come, and, you know, she kind of laid an ultimatum on me, and I said, okay, well, I'll go. And so that was kind of his, you know, something happened. I wanted to marry this girl, but she wouldn't marry me because I wasn't a believer, which is, you know, solid. And he decided, well, okay, I like her more than I like this worldview that I'm not super attached to, so I'll go check it out. He goes and checks it out and has a bunch of conversations and is trying to figure it out for his own. And that's kind of the second part, is how do I deal with this thing that's happened in my life that's caused me to question my belief system? And then they're confronted with Christ. What do they do with it? And if you're telling testimony videos, they've come to a place where they trust him. How does that change their life after that? What do you do next? How does that mess with their day-to-day at work, at home, with their money, with their time, with their energy, with their resources, all that stuff? If you can't find something fascinating of what Christ has done in their life, maybe you've grown too bored with the gospel or something, but get curious about it. Get hungry about hearing people's stories. And so working that structure out will get you so much further down the line. So a thing that helps me with structuring is understanding the theme of what we're talking about. And I don't mean like faith or something easy like that. I mean, like, so we were telling a story once of a couple that was dealing with infertility, and then they went into this whole adoption process. The theme isn't adoption. The theme is patience and waiting, and the pain and anxiety that causes, and them having to deal with that and go, be patient, be patient, be patient. Now, you can't say that in the film. That was in the subtext of it. That was what we were trying to display to people and say, this was the core, the heart of the matter of their story. They were patient and waiting, trying to have children on their own. They were patient in waiting through the adoption process. Now that they're parents, they're definitely having to practice a lot of patience. So that's a theme throughout the thing. And so finding that, and the way I like to do that is I call a person. Every single person I've ever interviewed, I know what their story is before the cameras and the lights are turned on. And if you're not doing that, you're wasting a lot of editing time, which means a lot of hard drives, which means you're spending money you don't have to spend, and you're spending time editing you don't have to spend. Call and get the story first. That is so key whenever you're trying to put a story structure together. You can't structure a story that you don't know what's happening. Call and get the details. Let them go for 20 to 30 minutes on the phone and just kind of try to understand it. Because I guarantee you, when pastor comes up and says, oh, you got to go talk to this guy. He used to be a biker on meth. When you call him, he's going to be like, I was never a biker. I played basketball for the NBA. And you're like, okay, you got to go and get the story for yourself. Or sometimes, it may not be the right story to tell. So when you structure your story the thing to keep in mind is, what is the story? Not the stuff I want to tell, but the story means A to B, B to C, C to D. I woke up this morning, I had breakfast, I went to work, did some editing on this, I went to lunch. That's the story. Now, if I break off of that and start veering off these paths and go, man, I got in a knife fight around, first off, that's a better story. Maybe throw that other stuff away, but then the knife fight story is the story. So I woke up, I got in my car, and there was a guy standing at the edge of my driveway with a knife. And I took out my knife and we fought each other. And if I started telling you about, in the middle of the fight, like lightning struck the transformer across the street, well, it's cool and it's neat and it's interesting, but if that had nothing to do with the knife fight, then this knife fight thing is probably a dumb idea to tell you about this, but it gives you an idea of that's the story people want to hear. So if you're telling a story of someone who came to know Christ, we want to hear about where are they coming from spiritually, or you're doing a promo, what's the story we're trying to tell? Because if we're telling a story about life groups or children's ministry, well, we don't need to talk a lot about the worship experience at our church or the donuts in the cafe. That's not a part of the thing we're telling. So you got to keep that through line throughout your story. And the way you do that is you get the person's A to B, C to D kind of story, meaning where were they in their lives? You have to kind of sort through that because they'll take you off on all kind of rabbit trails along the way. And the more you can kind of nail down that through line, the better off you're going to be. And as you're sort of figuring out the structure of the story, I would say there's two things to keep in mind. One, you have to stick to what interests you, and two, you have to make sure those interests don't take you away from the through line. So what interests you? Kind of the principle you use when you're making friends with people. When you talk to someone or do the interview, what is fascinating about their story? Now, if you're being fascinated by something that steals you away from the through line, either tell that story or you gotta throw it away, because you'll throw it away in the editing process. So find what interests you about the story and pursue that, because if you can't interest yourself with the thing, it's gonna be hard to keep anyone else's interest.